The dominator of the universe, Sai Itoshi, goes one-on-one against empty void eyes Hugo. A fight to see who truly dominates the midfield among the new gens. And so you already know it, baby. In today's video, we are going to look at each player's stats, abilities, and explore their best feats in order to determine who is the strongest talented learner in the U20 category. Sai Itoshi, the Itachi of Blue Lock and the prodigy of Japan. But since I've made tons of videos on the Japanese emperor lately, you already know all of this. We all know that Sai is a very professional player, with one of the best mentalities we've seen in this show. The guy has no emotional shackles holding him from seeing things clearly, nor does he have any irrational mental blocks in his playing style. He knows what he wants and he stops at nothing to get it. However, what's new is the fact that this is very important because his opponent today, Hugo, is actually a player with a game-changing mentality. Like, you have to understand, we're talking Noah's level of rationality with Hugo here. And so, Sai's insane mentality matters a lot in today's video. But that's for later. For now, let's actually start with his physicality, which I'm not going to spend too long on this as well, because what Sai is, physically speaking, is just a slightly less impressive Ren, meaning he is a well-rounded player with an amazing stats all over his physicality. He has great raw power and strength, great jumping ability, amazing speed, and an astonishing endurance. However, don't get things twisted, he doesn't dominate any area per se. However, he is a jack of all traits. As I said, I wouldn't say he is on Rin's level of mastery, or Rio for that matter, but he is still great at every aspect. However, as you all know, Sai is too technical for his physicality to be his best selling point, because where he truly shines is with his abilities and weapons. Now, I've always referred to Sai as the perfect midfielder, cause as his opponent today Hugo would put it, Sai is in perfect suitability with his playing style. Because you see, his whole existence and most of his abilities and weapons are all about delivering perfect passes to the front line. And as such, it is only fitting for us to actually start with his passing ability, as I truly believe that this is the most prerequisite weapon for any attacking midfielder. As for Sai, well, things get OP rather quickly, because saying that Sai has the most accurate passing ability in the U20 category would be an understatement. The guy pulls off Predator Eye's level of accuracy with his passes every time he delivers one. And this is in fact no coincidence, because he presents an ocular ability that helps him with his passing accuracy. However, for now, let's take it at face value and keep the ocular ability for later, because frankly, even though I am sure he has it, it is still a speculative weapon. For now, just know that Sai's accuracy is rather scary, and a perfect example of this that I always like to give is his pass to Shido for his Dragon Drive goal. You see, he delivered a perfect pass for Shido, yet at the same time, it was 2 centimeters away from Chigiri who jumped to stop it. Meaning, if he didn't have insane accuracy, he would have delivered a pass that wouldn't be fitting with Shido since he would be dodging Chigiri, or he would deliver a perfect pass that Chigiri would end up intercepting. However, being the insane player that he is, he was able to force a pass between the two options. It was perfect for Shido and at the same time barely avoided Chigiri. However, you have to understand, this could not be reached only with accuracy, and there is another weapon that Sai has that enabled him to reach Chigiri that way. However, again, I would rather to leave it for later. For now, let's carry out with his passing accuracy because I have another example. You see, while delivering a corner, Sai accounted for Rin trying to intercept his passes, and as such, he delivered a pass that would seem to be going towards Aiko. However, because Sai is crazy like that, the pass was just 2 centimeters away from Aiko and Rin, and at the same time, again, it was perfect for Shido. And this is what I am talking about here. Sai is just a crazy monster when it comes to accuracy. However, accurate is not everything there is to Sai's passing, because you see, Sai is also one of the most versatile passers in the entirety of the show, being again rivaled only by Charles in this regard. And mind you, this is not just for the type of passes. Even when it comes to his path trajectory and control over how the ball reaches the striker, Sai is just a monster of versatility, which means not only can he deliver all types of passes, he also can modify the trajectory of said passes however he pleases and however the situation calls for it. And I don't know about you guys, this alone coupled with his insane accuracy would make Sai one of the best passers in the entirety of the show. However, as you might have guessed, this is not everything to his passes. You see, sure, Sai could deliver very inaccurate passes. However, if he can't understand his players, he could deliver passes that are suboptimal. At the same time, if he can't understand his opponents, the same thing that happened to Charles and Ness would happen to him, where his passes could be intercepted easily. However, much like Hiyori, Sai has an insane ability at reading players, and he uses this to the fullest, both in reading his teammates and his strikers, but also in reading his opponents. The examples I gave previously with Shido and Chigiri or Shido with Aiko and Rin are perfect demonstration of this specifically. Sai was able to predict specifically what Shido was aiming for. At the same time, he was able to predict what Rin and Chigiri were aiming for as well. And so what Sai did is force a pass between being perfect for Shido and at the same time avoid the defenders. And mind you, as I said, even insane passers like Nessa and Charles fail this miserably. The only other midfielder I would say pulls off this consistently would be Hiyori. However, you have to understand, Hiyori doesn't do it to the same level as Sai, because I am yet to see someone who understands his strikers the same way Sai does. And I know what you might say, both Ness and Charles understand their strikers perfectly. However, the case with these two is that they've always did it with insane strikers or strikers they've played with a lot. Sai could literally do it with dogshit strikers. He did it comfortably with all the U20 strikers before Shido joined the game. And this by definition makes his ability to understand his strikers just top tier. And of course, when you couple this with his ability to understand his opponent, Sai honestly becomes a very scary camp, because he is the type to force a pass towards the striker no matter how grim the situation looks. However, and since we brought Ness and Hiyori into the conversation, Sai doesn't just understand his strikers in terms of what they can do. He can actually push them further with his insane passes. And we've seen him do this with Sendo and of course with Shido, where he constantly challenged them with his passes until they both soared higher for the next level. Sure, Sendo was shit and his next level ended up being destroyed by Ren, but for Shido he was able to reach a level that shocked even Ego and Sai himself. And I can't help but think that this is similar to what Ness did with Kaiser at the end of the PXG game, where Ness rebelled against what Kaiser was trying to achieve and delivered a pass that would only be fitting for future Kaiser. Meaning Ness was trying to push Kaiser further, he was trying to challenge him in order for the blue rose to bloom. However, there is a catch, as I said before, because what Ness did is that he evolved and he was trying to evolve Kaiser with him. However, Sai could be just trying to evolve the players to his current level, and so for this feat I wouldn't say it is as crazy as what Ness did, but it is still impressive nonetheless. However, and speaking of pushing Shido further, one of the coolest feats that Sai pulled off with the Zesty Demon is actually the reflex meeting reflex weapon, which is where both the striker and the midfielder aim for the most perfect spot, and they meet each other there reflexively without the need for eye contact or any coordinated pattern. And this weapon is rather deadly, because defenders who cannot see the empty spot behind them have no way of telling what the striker and the midfielder are trying to pull, or hell, even the timing of what they're trying to do. But also, this weapon is rather flexible, because even in a pinch, the striker and the midfielder could coordinate all of a sudden and it could lead to a goal very easily. And you have to understand, this weapon was insane. It was the one that actually ended up beating Ubers. However, it was not the first time we've seen this, because Sai pulled it off with Shido very effortlessly. And obviously Shido takes a lot of credit here too, but Sai pulling this off just like that without even breaking a sweat is also one of the most incredible feats any camp could pull off. But now, and to end the weapons that relate to Sai's passing, let's actually talk about the speculative ocular ability I said Sai presents. You see, due to the way Sai squeezes his passes and forces them through to reach the strikers, I am speculating that he presents the same eyes that Charles does, which are what I like to call the sniper eyes. And these ones are actually the counterpart to the predator eyes, while the latter are meant meant for restrictive players to force a shot or an opportunity through tough situations. The sniper eyes are actually meant for talented learners, where they can choose the perfect path from a plethora of options, instead of giving a lobbing path to Shido or giving him one that is on his right. Sai was able to deduct in an instance that the most optimal route would be to squeeze the ball 2 centimeters away from Chigiri and make it perfect for Shido. And that's how I think it functions, because we don't have any explanation for this ocular ability, and in fact we don't even have any confirmation for them other than the pattern on Charles' eyes. However, after deducting how he plays and how Sai squeezed his passes, I actually reached this conclusion. The Predator eyes are all about forcing a way through tough situations, while the Sniper eyes are about finding the perfect route among a plethora of options. However, and speaking of ocular abilities, let's actually talk about one that was confirmed for Sai. Of course, I'm referring to Metavision. You see, during the U20 category, we did not understand how Sai was able to read the game ahead of everyone. However, after Isagi unlocked Metavision and he started to have those perfect positionings and he started to understand how the whole field is functioning, Isagi deducted that Metavision must be the explanation into why Sai was able to be ahead of everyone at reading the field. And if you think about it, this makes total sense. Sai was literally everywhere as soon as the ball is loose. However, let me ask you this, where does Sai stand in terms of Metavision? Because as you all know, much like everything in life, there are levels to Metavision. For example, we know that Kaiser's Metavision is years ahead of Nico's, and Hiyori's Metavision is definitely better than Ryo's. However, where does Sai stand? You see, obviously my first instincts would put him on the level of Isagi in the Manshine City game. However, that could not be furthest from the truth. You see, judging by how some of the most insane weapons and feats that shape the NEL are all weapons that Sai presented before, it is only natural for one to assume that his Metavision should be at the highest level of the NEL. It means that his Metavision should be on Kaiser and Isagi at the end of the PXG game. And this is because Sai consistently showed that his level is definitely at the high end of the NEL. And so saying that his Metavision is on that level is definitely something I can work with. However, and speaking of Isagi at the end of the PXG game, one of the strongest weapons he acquired was the fastest piece. However, after rereading the U20 game, I deducted that Sai might have a form of that weapon specifically. And that's because if we look at how Isagi achieved that weapon, it would reveal that he was only able to attain it after he rid himself of any emotional shackles and after he sold his soul in order to win. And so, judging by how Sai's mentality is the same as Isagi after Noah's betrayal, and how he always seemed to move before everyone, one could assume he at least have a variation of the fastest piece. Maybe not to Isagi's level, or maybe even higher, we don't know. But for the very least, I am speculating that he has the fastest piece at one level or another. However, because we spoke about Sai's mentality, I think it is fitting for us to talk about it right now. Because you see, Sai presents one of the best mentalities in the show. He is very rational, he is very calm, and he doesn't let his emotions run high. He always understands the situation and he always knows exactly what must be done in any given scenario. Except of course the final play at the U20 game against his brother. However, in any other area or scenario, Sai is always calm, collected, and very professional, which means he sees things clearly no matter the situation, much like Isagi had post-Noah clarity and much like how Hugo right now. And so, I truly believe that Sai has one of the best mentalities in the show. But enough about his mentality, let's actually move to another group of weapons, which are the type of weapons that help Sai to get into the perfect position from where he could deliver his passes. And this is actually twofold. The first, of course, is his insane off-the-ball movements and his positioning. And of course, they both stem from his Metavision, which is one of the best in the U20 category. However, and even if his positioning would get challenged today, I think the next weapon, which is his dribbling ability, will forever be a formidable weapon. And this is because his dribbling is completely reactive. Unlike players like Bachira or Lorenzo, who start the dribbling with their own rhythm and their own imagination. Sai, on the other hand, uses dribbling techniques in order to dodge and feint his opponents, meaning Sai doesn't have a rhythm necessarily, he just exerts moves that counter his opponents, and thus he is much harder to read and much harder to deal with. And when you couple this with his ability to perfectly position himself, and with the insane level he operates at when it comes to his insane passes, you get one of, if not the most dominant cam in the entirety of Blue Lock. And in all honesty, he reigns on that throne with complete terror. No one can touch Sai when it comes to his ability to deliver perfect passes for the strikers. However, can the perfect midfielder actually beat natural selection personified? The man with empty void eyes, the newest, the baddest, and the most dominant new gen, Hugo, the guy who sees all, overpowers all, and above all, logically dismantles all. Hugo is one of the few characters in Blue Lock who immediately hooked the community from just one chapter. He showed up, destroyed Japan completely, and led France to score a goal very early on. That's how impressive this guy is. However, his crazy doesn't end with this, because his philosophy and mentality are just gold. However, let's not actually explore them yet and leave them at the end of Hugo's character analysis. But you have to understand, one of the things I liked about Hugo immediately is actually the fact that he is one of the smartest characters in the show, yet he has the build of Kunigami or Baru. Like, bro is mad beefy for someone this smart, he be reading in the gym and shit. But let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about Hugo's insane physicality. Now, as I stated, he is mad beefy, which means that he has an insane raw power and strength. Like, bro swallowed Isagi and Ryo so effortlessly. And Ryo himself is fairly strong, but Hugo was like, nah fam, you ain't moving. And even before that, he pushed Rain to the edge of the universe with just one tap, and we are yet to see him being challenged physically, as he looks the part, he looks scary, and he looks beefy. And so no one has challenged him yet. But I have a hunch that if Baru and Kunigami join, maybe they will go against him in a strength and raw power contest. However, for now, just understand that the guy is mad beefy, and he is one of the strongest players in the U20 category. And what's surprising about all of this is that despite the enormous muscle mass, Hugo is remarkably fast. Now, we don't have any feats of him actually blitzing players, but in one moment he was behind Isagi, and as soon as the latter tried to reach with his hand to push him away, the guy spun and positioned himself in front of him just like that. And I know this is not clear-cut speed feat, but it kinda makes sense if you think about it. This would explain how he can easily keep up with Loki, despite the latter being that fast. And this would honestly put him on maybe Chigiri or Zantetsu's level of speed, or if not that, maybe on Kaiser and Otoya's level. The point is, not only is bro mad beefy, he is also very fast, kinda like Adam Blake if you think about it. But next, for his jumping ability, I mean, he has one feat, but it is too early for me to say where he stands. I think with his insane muscle mass, he should jump very high, kinda like how Kunigami is. And finally, we are not going to talk about endurance because the guy did not break even a sweat in one of the most intense games we've seen as of yet. And of course, much like any other new Gen 11, they all have absurd level of endurance. Maybe not to the level of Lorenzo, but I would say definitely on Kaiser and Sai's level of endurance. However, with this, we are done with his physical stats. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to talk about his abilities and weapons. And immediately I gotta say, I feel like I'm getting the same vibes from him as Kaiser, where they both have few weapons, but they are so absurd and so overpowered, they push them to being one of the best in the U20 category. And much like Kaiser, who has his shooting at the center of his playing style, I feel like with Hugo, he definitely has his mentality and philosophy at the center of his whole existence. And so let's actually start with that. Let's start with his mentality and his suitability theory. Well, to be honest, after listening to Hugo talk about his philosophy, I immediately can say that this is one of the best mentalities we have in the U20 category. Like, the guy is presenting Noah's level of rationality in his thinking and his philosophy. philosophy. And here's the kicker, I've seen a lot of people not understand it, which actually spans from YouTubers to other people in the community. And I feel like it's not that they failed at understanding Hugo, but rather the way the writer portrayed it doesn't actually do the theory justice. You see, Hugo's theory, it's not about going only for what's suitable for you. It's not about limiting your options to only what suits you. Rather, it is all about achieving the best version of yourself. It is about attaining the highest level of play any player could achieve, which obviously would be far better when you are playing to your strengths, when you are playing to your strong points. Which means by being in a very suitable position in life, you can achieve success beyond what you can do outside of suitability. And I feel like that has to be one of the healthiest mentalities in the show. Nico tried to copy Isagi by going for his own goal, but at the end of the day he enjoyed stopping players. And this was not clear to him after Ego put him as a defender. No. It was clear to him from the beginning, because as we've seen in the Nagi spin-off novel, the moment he played and he's seen how crazy Zantetsu and Ryo are, his first instinct was actually to try and stop them. And so perfect suitability for him would not be copying Isagi, but rather playing to his strengths and being an amazing defender, which as you all know he obviously is. And so Hugo's mentality is just perfect. If someone is great to be the beating heart of a team, to be the best defensive midfielder there is, then if they want to achieve the best version of themselves, it is better to play for their strengths. And that's the gist of it. However, this is only his philosophy. What about his mentality? Well, you see, Hugo by nature is a very analytical and a judgmental person. He is definitely like Karasu, Aiko and Isagi, in that he judges everything logically and he tries to achieve the best rational option. And this is why I like to say that I feel like his mentality is a little bit of Noah, a little bit of Snuffy, and a little bit of Aiko all put in Karasu's mind, which is definitely funny, but more importantly, I think by far it gives him the best mentality we've seen in the entirety of the show, except of course with Noah. I feel like Hugo's mentality is second best to Noah only. And mind you, I only think this way because Hugo does not have that much feats for me to put him on Noah's level. For now, I think the second best mentality after Noah is definitely fitting, because no one sees things as clearly as Hugo, and no one is in tune with his playing style as Hugo. At the same time, he is very logical and rational, and so his mentality is definitely one of the best. However, if we go a step back and actually talk about his philosophy again, you see Hugo is very judgmental and he always knows if people are in suitable situations or if they are not. And thus I feel like one of the craziest weapons that he presents is his ability to understand other people around him. Think about how Hiyori and Karasu read people impeccably. However, I feel like Hugo does it on a much higher playing field. In fact, he might be actually the best at this, and honestly that would not surprise me at all, because the guy can immediately tell if you are in a suitable or unsuitable environment. But next, let's actually talk about how smart he is, specifically on how he resembles Snuffy, because as we've seen from the players that counter Chigiri and Bachira, Hugo seems to be able to put a system for his team to follow to a T, and thus ensuring success for the team as a whole. And I definitely don't think that he does it to the level of Snuffy, where he has patterns for almost anything. But for the very least, because he understands people very easily, I think he too has the ability to come up with patterns depending on the situation on the field. Again, not to the level of Snuffy or even close to that, but I would say he is still second only to him. And I know at this point, I am only talking about his mental weapons. What about actual weapons on the field? Well, first, let's talk about his dueling ability. What do you get from a guy that is mad beefy and at the same time he is an insane analytical person? Well, a mad beefy titan that can understand every player impeccably. And thus with his insane physique, Hugo can completely shut down any player he is in a duel with. And I know there haven't been many duels with him, but the way he swallowed Isagi, Ryo and Rin all effortlessly is just a testament to how insane his dueling ability is. I mean, again, he just put his hand on Rin and the guy could not even come close to the ball. But dueling aside, I think Hugo also presents the strongest ocular ability in the show, which is of course Metavision. And not only that, I think that his Metavision is better than Isagi and Kaiser at the end of the NEL, because even Isagi with his fastest piece and his insane Metavision could not actually account for Hugo not once, not twice, but actually 3 times. He was able to sneak behind Isagi and trick him with all of his might. And I don't think you guys understand how absurd his Metavision must be, because for a guy to sneak up on Isagi of all people is just unheard of. Remember what happened to Lorenzo in the Uber's game? Sure, he was able to sneak up on Yuki, but he was not able to sneak up on Isagi. However, with Hugo, even if Isagi knows that he is coming, it's a running gag at this point that he's always breathing down his neck, like he's always is under his skin. And maybe Isagi is not thinking straight, but this happened even before the suitability theory. Isagi thought he is totally free, only for Hugo to show up all of a sudden and completely destroy him with his insane dueling ability. However, Metavision is not the only ocular ability Hugo presents, because after the last chapter, much like Charles and Sai, I believe that Hugo also presents the sniper eyes. And I know a lot of people, even YouTubers, said that Hugo activated Metavision at that point. However, I assure you guys that's not Metavision, and I have 2 reasons for that. The first is the obvious one. Why would Hugo use Metavision when he is about to shoot? Like if we look at Isagi, Kaiser or Ryo, all of these players utilize Metavision when they are building the attack. And for Kaiser, he activates the Predator eyes when he is about to shoot. As for Hugo, he only activated these eyes when he was shooting. And so there wouldn't be Metavision because he would have activated it before. But the second reason is actually deeper, because the design of these eyes resemble what Charles presented in the PXG game. They are definitely the same, although Hugo presents the gears around the eyes. And I know what you might say, that this is how Charles's Metavision looks. However, that's not the case again, because here's a scene of Charles actually utilizing the regular Metavision. However, when he is about to pass or read a critical pass from his opponents, he always activates these eyes. And so, much like I speculated with Sai, I am sure that Hugo also presents the sniper eyes. Albeit, the theory is stronger with Hugo because we actually have the design. I mean, at this point, it's not a theory, he definitely presents those eyes. And as I said with Sai, these eyes help the player figure out what's the best route to take. And in this case, despite what Loki, Charles and the rest of the French attacking force presented, Hugo dictated that the best option is to shoot for himself and score. And so once more, this is completely in line with what the eyes present. But enough about Hugo's ocular abilities, let's actually shift gears and talk about the final weapon in his arsenal, which is of course his passing ability. Now in the first chapter we've seen him, he was just absurd. He was able to deliver a pass from the center of the field straight to the penalty box, and he delivered it among several players despite some of them actually presenting Metavision. And the pass did not look strong, it looked very low. However, it was insanely hard to stop because I think even though it was not strong, it definitely was insanely fast. However, the second time he delivered a pass, we've seen Nico being able to stop him, but I think that's on Loki and his positioning more than it is on Hugo. However, you have to understand, with the sniper eyes, his passes, even though they are not the strongest or the hardest to deal with, become very deadly because he can easily pick the best route for his passes. And so I think from the sniper eyes and the way Hugo delivers his passes, I would say he has an above average passing ability. Definitely not comparable to the likes of Hiyori or Charles, but I would say it gives him the same playmaking level as Lorenzo. However, overall, I would say that Hugo might be the most dominant player in the U20 category period. Sure, the likes of Baro, Ren, Loki and Shido are explosive, but they do not dominate the game the same way that Hugo does. He is the best beating heart for any team he plays for. And overall, I would say he is the most dominant defensive midfielder we've seen in the show. However, can natural selection personified actually defeat the Japanese Emperor? For how this matchup would go, I gotta say that we definitely included a lot of potential into this one, and it might seem unfair a little bit for Hugo since he did not have a lot of showing. However, trust me guys, the guy is so OP that it is enough for this battle to actually be close. And so, how is that? How could Hugo actually rival Sai? Well, first, let's talk about an individual battle. When it comes to a duel, who would win? And in this one, I gotta say that Hugo would completely decimate Sai. And it's not just about that he is a better duelist. I mean, Sai's dribbling is no joke, and so even if Hugo is an insane duelist, there is no guarantee that he could stop Sai. However, the reason I think Hugo would completely decimate Sai is because of the interaction between restriction and freedom. And this is in spite of the fact that Sai is one of the strongest freedom type players. And this is because Hugo's restriction is that scary. Like the guy was able to lock down the Demon King. We're talking about not just one of the best freedom type players we've seen in the show, but also Isagi's adaptability is no joke. The guy is very hard to tame and he is perfect for taking advantage of any crack by the enemy team. However, he is completely helpless against Hugo, simply because Hugo's restriction is that deep. And so for that reason, and because Hugo's dueling ability is just absurd, I think he definitely beats Sai one-on-one. However, as you all know, this is just one aspect of looking at things. The more interesting point of view, however, is in the overall assessment, because that's what matters in the realm of Blue Lock. What can you present for the team? That's what matters when determining which player is better. And here, to be honest, it kinda gets dangerous a little bit for Hugo, because even though he is absurd and his mentality is the best, the sheer number of feats and weapons Sai has would definitely give him a huge edge here. I mean, not only is Sai himself playing in perfect suitability, he is a midfielder that pushes the whole team up a notch with him. He is a guy who can play with any striker and turn any playing style into real chances to score. And so it is really hard to beat someone like Sai. It is really hard to beat the perfect attacking midfielder. And honestly, even though Hugo's restriction and his ability to control the whole team is impressive, I don't think it is enough to give him the edge over Sai. And I know in any given match, Hugo's restriction could definitely cripple Sai even if he plays with other players. I feel like for any given team and from the feats we know, Sai might be more appealing. However, there are 2 points that I think would give the edge for Hugo. The first of which is mentality. You see, Sai's mentality is insane and it is really good, but it's not the best mentality. Hugo's mentality is perfection. And when we factor in that the guy has the best mentality after Noah, and he is in fact the smartest man after Snuffy, shit really goes wild for Hugo and he becomes far better at elevating his team. And in fact, if we had more feats, I would say he is even better than Sai at this. However, because we don't, I am giving Sai the benefit of the doubt, and I am going to say that this evens out the playing field. However, do you think it's safe? Because where things get interesting and really devastating for Sai is with 2 statements that Hugo made about himself. The first of which was in his conversation with Isagi. He said that he is being second to Loki, but this does not mean that Loki is better than him. In fact, he believes that he is equal to Loki because Loki himself cannot break through his limiter without the help of Hugo. And this is in all honesty very interesting and completely new in Blue Lock. But the main point and the main takeaway from this is the fact that Hugo referred to himself as equal to Loki, meaning all the craziness that Loki can pull off, Hugo believes himself to be on that level. And this is not the saying of someone like Baro or Rin who think very highly of themselves. This is coming from a talented learner who is completely rational and also completely devoid of emotions. But also he is one of the smartest players, and thus I doubt that this statement is false. If Hugo believes himself to be on Loki's level, that's where we should actually believe he is at. And the second statement by Hugo himself actually confirms this. When Japan through Karasu and Hiyori scored, Charles started panicking, however Loki and Hugo are not impressed. But here's the kicker. Even though Loki exists and he is the one with the ball, it was Hugo that said, "I will lead France's destiny." Which means even though Loki exists, Hugo is the actual leader of the team. And this kinda reminded me of the relationship between Isagi and Rin in the U20 game. Sure, Rin was the star of the team, but no one could argue that the brains behind the team was definitely Isagi. And for that reason, Isagi ended up being on the same level as Rin. And so from this, I believe even though the star is Loki due to his explosive speed, Hugo must definitely be on his level. And mind you, being on his level doesn't mean that they are equal or Hugo is better. No, Hugo could be worse than Loki, that's fine, but he is on the same league. And unfortunately, I don't think Sai is on that level yet. Loki is praised by Noah and he considers him the biggest threat to himself, meaning he puts him on Levi and Prince's level. But in fact, the way Loki actually respects Hugo says a lot about where they stand. A broken genius like Loki, one of the most self-centered players in the entirety of the show, is actually following in Hugo's lead. And that's just absurd, man. That's just next level of insanity. The guy is being respected by Loki of all people. And here's the thing, here's how Loki acts with the other pros. Sure, he respects them, but he looks down on them. Yet with Hugo, he completely trusts him and respects him. And so for that reason, I think Hugo is definitely the winner. I think he is the man walking with the W, and to be honest, I don't even think it's close. Sure, Sai's potential is about that life, but I don't think he is on Hugo and Loki's level. And so Hugo will be the one walking with the W. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.